Hi, everyone. My name is Tobi, and today I'm joined with Lise. And together, we're excited to talk today about Hermez Pipelines. Specifically, we're going to talk about how we're forging the path to a delightful deployment experience at Pinterest. Like I mentioned, I'm Tobi, and this is what I looked like before the pandemic. And this is Lise, and together we work on the engineering productivity team. All right, so hopefully most people here have heard about Pinterest before. I like to think of Pinterest as the positive corner of the internet. People come to Pinterest to find inspiration, to pin recipes or get style inspiration, home decoration inspiration, or just do DIY projects. And Pinterest, to give you a bit of context about the scale of Pinterest, every month we have more than 400 million people coming to our site. And each person is interacting with pins, they're saving pins, they're repinning things. And all of this goes into creating one of the world's largest user-generated interest graphs that there is on the planet. Cool. So I mentioned that we both work on the engineering productivity team. And this is our mission. Our mission is to create a fast, safe, and delightful path from idea to production without worrying about infrastructure. This is the charter that we kind of all aspire to. This is what we're trying to do every day in all our meetings, all our work, is to provide this delightful experience for our users who are other engineers at the company. So this sentiment, sometimes we've seen the sentiment sometimes where people feel like they're trying to do something somewhat simple, like they want to deploy a tiny React app or they want to deploy a Slack bot, and they feel like they're bouncing around different UIs and different tools. And when someone has this experience, it's not a good experience, and they wonder, why is it so difficult? Why do I need to use so many different tools and hear about different concepts and hear about different things to just kind of add to the barrier of entry? So this is something we're aware of, and this is something that we're actively trying to combat, to trying to fight complexity. All right, so now I'm going to give you a bit of context around CI/CD at Pinterest. There was a world before Spinnaker. So most people here are familiar with the community. Spinnaker is about 4 or 5 years old. And obviously Pinterest being about 10 years old, we were doing deployments before Spinnaker was around. And I say it wasn't pretty because there were some challenges that people faced in the pre-Spinnaker world. So if we think about a hypothetical use case or a hypothetical engineer, we have Amy. Amy is an engineer on the web team. And Amy's desire is to ship features on our web app to basically help our users so that they can have a more delightful experience. However, in trying to do this, Amy could be frustrated by the deploy process. And what do I mean by frustrated? Where is this frustration coming from? Well, we know that before Spinnaker, we were using a custom tool. So this custom tool had some limitations in what it could do in terms of orchestrating deployments. There was also limited knowledge around how to maintain this tool, how to develop this tool. So it wasn't a good situation. We also had only a few deployments a day. These were actually scheduled deployments. I think it was like 10:30 and 2 p.m. every day for deployments for our user-facing applications. And because we had only 2 deployments, we had a large change list. So frequently there could be tens or hundreds of commits going into a single deployment. In addition, we had no canary analysis. So we weren't learning some of the differences about the metrics of what's going on between canary and prod. And this kind of led to scenarios where we had a lot of failures in production, and we had to do rollbacks and hot fixes to try and remediate the situation. So it wasn't a great experience. Okay, so this graph is a summary or a culmination of the work that was done by a cross-functional team of engineers at Pinterest. Basically, they identified the problems which I just mentioned, and their goal was to try and see how we could increase deployments at Pinterest in order to increase velocity and also have a higher level of reliability in our software release process. So in this graph, you can literally see that there's sort of an inflection point where the number of deploys started drastically increasing, and then the land to deploy time, so how much time it took for people's actual commits to get out, started decreasing. So this is essentially what we're trying to get at when we say CI/CD. This was essentially the impact that this work resulted in. So how did this happen? How are we able to mitigate some of the CI/CD challenges that we had? Well, the first thing is we identified the core user problems. There are a lot of different things this team could have chosen to focus on, but for our use case, it was two major things: velocity, moving quickly. That was actually one of our key company pillars or values at the time, and also reliability, right? So we know that failures are going to happen, but how do we quickly recover from any of those failures? Second thing was the targeted services that were with the most to gain and most to learn from. So for us, this happened to be two of our user-facing services. These had hundreds of committers. There's lots of code. There's a lot of interest, so we could basically learn more, and also we had a lot to gain because the land to deploy time was the largest here. And another important thing was identifying that success metric. So for this use case, that was the P90 time for land to deploy. And we obviously took advantage of standardizing the rollouts by leveraging some of these flexible building blocks that Spinnaker allows us to have. And I'll talk about some of these in more detail. So this is an example of a canonical deploy pipeline. In this case, we have 5 stages. Each of the stages is actually a pipeline of its own, but some of these are custom stages that we built. So deploy, for example, we built a deploy to Teletran stage. Teletran is our in-house deployment engine. And basically this kind of provided a template or a standard for other service owners to learn from. Cool. So how are we doing with Amy? We've made a lot of progress in a lot of different areas. Today, Amy is able to ship her commits and her features more confidently. And we do vastly more deploys a day. Our change list is vastly reduced. It's just a few commits. We still have failures, but we have fewer. And failures are inevitable in software. But one of the benefits is we have better recovery systems because we have canonical rollback pipelines that we can call on when we do have incidents. And also we have implemented automatic canary analysis on some of our production services. And this is providing a lot of value for us. So while we've adopted Spinnaker, we've noticed a bunch of things about how our users like to interact with Spinnaker. Our users definitely love the automation, the predictability, the fact that we get more deploys per day. And some of our super users are also happy that they have the flexibility to create these custom building blocks, like custom deploy stages, custom manual judgment stages for whatever the use case might be. We've also found that our users have found it hard to debug and keep track of complex pipelines, especially when these pipelines have sub-pipelines. And one of the most challenging things our users have said is it's difficult to have a sense for what is actually going on right now and where are we in that sort of flow of things. Another challenge is that people have felt that it's challenging to learn another tool that has a lot of complexity sort of in it. So where are we today with all of this? So like I mentioned, as I showed in the graph, we've drastically increased deploy frequency. So that's that velocity pillar. We've improved the quality, so reliability of our rollouts. We have a lot more confidence when we do rollout changes. But we think there's some way to go in providing a world-class deployment experience. And this is something that Lise is going to speak about in a minute.
Great. Thanks for that context, Toby. This brings us to Hermez. So introducing Hermez. What is it? It's our vision of a single pane of glass for CI/CD at Pinterest. We're not quite there yet, but it's totally in line with our mission on engineering productivity, with highlighting that fast, safe, and delightful path to production without the worrying of infrastructure. So today, Hermez is more focused on that deployment side. It's a one-stop shop for all things deployments. We support Kubernetes services, cron jobs, streaming jobs. We're working to support more as we continue to scale up. And it also provides a way for developers to, at this one-stop shop, you can deploy your code, monitor those deployments, and then debug if anything goes wrong and look at those logs. So Hermez is a great example of how we've focused on UX, or user experience, this year. So I'll talk about some of those benefits. So it's well understood in the product world that prioritizing your users' needs and listening to that end user is key to setting your product up for success. You can measure good UX through customer satisfaction, among other metrics. On the flip side, a poor UX is really costly. In our context of engineering tools, this could translate into incidents and service disruptions. Every minute counts in those moments, especially, and time is money. Lastly, we live in an attention economy. We've all been there. We're bombarded by notifications and things on our screens. And it's even more relevant today, where a lot of people had to shift to a remote and work from home culture. We don't need to add more disruption and distraction to our employees, our engineers. So focusing on a good experience is key. So naturally, we ask the question, can we roll up the greatness of Spinnaker into the greatness of Hermez? A beautiful UI that's easy to use. So we said yes, but we need to talk with those customers first. And I'll take you through a little sidebar on user research first to really show you guys how important this is. So what is user research? It's a form of data, qualitative data, that informs the why. If quantitative data is the what, qualitative is the why. So it colors the full picture, gives you more context around things like pain points and what users, what things resonate with users. It also builds empathy with those users. So that sounds great, right? So talking with them directly, having that direct line of feedback is the most effective way to internalize feedback. It might be great to get a user research report from a team of researchers, but really studies have shown that internalizing it helps you in your day-to-day of building something. So even if you're not a designer, a researcher, you're building something for other people. So focusing on the user, like having that open line of feedback back and forth is critical. So one tip here, if you want to run some one-on-one interviews, is that remain as neutral as possible. Don't ask leading questions. You don't want to push your opinions on others. Be a friendly sponge, like SpongeBob here. Actively listen, soak it up, and then at the end, when you come to analysis, you filter your lens of expertise and guidance through the feedback. So users might not always know what they need. So we talked with our users and we learned. Here are some of the findings on this first page. As Toby told us before, unsurprisingly, the benefits of pipelines are understood. Things like automation, templates, and testing. Everyone's a fan of that. A key finding was that a single source of truth is super important. Obviously in software, that's critical. The less services, the better. Syncing between services. If we're adding another service, this could increase issues between syncing. And also configuration as code was sort of polarizing a bit, and a good UI and user experience is great, but then going back to the point about a single source of truth, we decided ultimately configuration as code or pipelines as code is a good thing to move forward with, less surfaces. Some other findings from this research and one-on-one interviews was that Spinnaker wasn't too much of a learning curve for these folks. However, some features were either missable, like rollbacks and revision history, or actions like deleting was just too easy to do, which we want to avoid. And finally, tracking down where code comes from was difficult. We know it's a known issue at Pinterest, but we also know that this is more on the CI integration side. So to bring us through the journey of tackling this on Hermez, we started with pipelines as code. You configure your pipeline in YAML, which goes through the translation layer to JSON, and then that mitigates those issues around syncing. We also provide those canonical pipeline templates as a guide for our users. So once the user creates a pipeline through code, we had to give a way for our users to discover it in the UI. So here is a little prototype of some of the designs we came up with to surface pipelines on the front end. Hermez can call the Spinnaker API and then surface it here. So we have a way to sort by project, for instance. Next, we tackled and focused on critical actions first, like manually running or executing a pipeline, or rollbacks, which are obviously really important when you encounter failures. So here we see an example or prototype of a rollback flow where we ask the user for a reason. We provide a little bit more friction so that it's less easy to make a mistake. And we give more context around what this is, what the consequences are. And we gather data too around what sorts of incidents they might be coming across. And then finally, a preview of our future vision is this. So we have a pipeline visualization here showing that canonical pipeline template. However, we're definitely not at feature parity yet today. It's a journey. And we definitely see the complexity and the challenge and the complexity of representing sub-pipelines within pipelines. And that's where we stand today. But so far, it's been great getting feedback from our users. So we've seen that folks have reached out to us to tell us that they're having, that it's a joy to set up a cron job, et cetera. So we keep that direct line of feedback with our users on a normal cadence. We also got some recent feedback from our ads API team that the velocity has drastically increased. So going back to that pillar OKR goal at Pinterest, we're working towards it. It hits our mission of creating a fast, safe, and delightful path to production without the worry of infrastructure. We're forging that path to a delightful deployment experience.
Cool.
Awesome.
And Hermez is currently an in-house product, but we definitely do have a desire to open source it. So if anyone here is interested in what we're building or would like to talk to us about open sourcing Hermez, if you're having similar challenges, we'd love to connect with you. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. And yeah, we'll just love to hear what you're building and see how we can collaborate together.